You likely already heard the news, right? Ubisoft is not doing really well after the release of Ghost Recon Breakpoint. What should have been their big fall game is a major flop. A good example is that GTA 5, you know, that game that came out 5 years ago on the PS4, sold more than Breakpoint in the PlayStation Store in Europe in the launch month of Breakpoint, while Breakpoint launched early in the month and had this big marketing budget. That's really bad. And on Xbox, it's not doing really well either. It was number 19 in the most played Xbox game charts, and that was 1 week after it came out. Like, it was beaten by World War C, that is a way smaller game. And Ubisoft acknowledges the bad performance too, saying that the critical reception and the sales during the game's first week were very disappointing. And if they go out and say that, then it must be really bad. Their stock also dropped 21% after the news. So what does this all mean? Well, actually a lot. So I want to go over everything in this video and also talk about the next Assassin's Creed and how this might impact that Viking game that we expect in 2020. Would of course be awesome if you could leave a like on the video as it shows your support. And let's go. This was my reaction when I saw the news that Ubisoft delayed all their announced upcoming games. Like, I really could not believe that they would move Watch Dogs Legion, Rainbow Six Quarantine and Gods and Monsters from their initial February and March release windows to the next financial year. And later we learned during the financial call that we can expect these games now starting July 2020 till the end of 2020. So they have 3 big games in 6 months time, or likely even more. What we know now is that between April 2020 and March 2021 we will see 5 big AAA games from Ubisoft. And AAA does not mean Just Dance or a Mario Rabbids game. No, real big budget multi-platform titles like the 3 that were delayed. So we get 2 more. And I think it's pretty obvious what those 2 unannounced games are, but what Ubisoft said about these titles is that they are from the biggest franchises, that they will have high quality, good polish, and are well armed to be strong sellers during the year. And I really think there are only 2 possible options. Far Cry is one of them. Far Cry 5 launched in March 2018, so having the true sequel ready 3 years later makes a ton of sense. And this is how Ubisoft has been rolling out the franchise this generation. Far Cry 4 launched in November 2014, then we got Far Cry Primal in early 2016, 2 years later we got Far Cry 5, and then 1 year later Far Cry New Dawn, so then 2 years after New Dawn we will very likely get Far Cry 6. Let's not forget that Far Cry 5 is still Ubisoft's best-selling game this generation. Like, I still think that Rainbow Six Siege made more money, but in terms of units sold, Far Cry 5 is really the most popular game. So yes, they would be stupid to not release a new one 3 years after Far Cry 5. And of course the other title from one of their biggest franchises has to be Assassin's Creed. The rumored Viking game by the same lead team that made Assassin's Creed Origins. They released that game in October 2017, so to have a new game ready 3 years later seems like the right time. And one thing that really stood out to me is that Ubisoft noted during their call that Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag was one of the biggest Ubisoft games ever. And that was also thanks to it being a cross-gen title that first launched on the PS3 and Xbox 360 and then got a PS4 and Xbox One version when those consoles launched. It really sounded like something they wanted to do again, and the stars align. They likely have an Assassin's Creed game ready in the fall of 2020, just when the PS5 and Xbox Scarlet are coming out. It would be a logical step though to move your other planned titles a little bit, because you already have 3 games in the second half of 2020 all of a sudden. But no, I don't think that they will move Assassin's Creed Kingdom or Ragnarok or whatever they end up calling it, even though Watch Dogs Legion will launch very close to it. And that also makes me think that Watch Dogs Legion is a September 2020 game at the latest. Like, then you still have some time between that and the new Assassin's Creed. Hopefully they can hit August with Legion, because the more time in between the 2 third-person open world games, the better, of course. Then we also have Gods and Monsters, the game from the Assassin's Creed Odyssey creators that, just like Kingdom, will lean heavily on mythological stuff. Sure, they look different and like the gameplay is slightly different, but they could end up cannibalizing each other too. Although the focus for Gods and Monsters seems to be more on the family, like the Switch audience, while Assassin's Creed is of course more focused on the hardcore gamer. And why these games and Rainbow Six Quarantine are, by the way, delayed is to give the developers more time to ensure their quality, so that what happened with Breakpoint won't happen again. And Gods and Monsters always seem to have a short development time. Again, it's the Assassin's Creed Odyssey team that launched their massive game in October 2018. And almost a year and a half later, they were expected to release a brand new IP. That is very ambitious, to say the least. We got Jason Schreier from Kotaku, who has his sources, as has been proven many times before. He chimes in on his recent Split Screen podcast. I will leave a link to the podcast in the video description. Either way, what he heard is that the schedule on Gods and Monsters was always hard and that it was going to be kind of a mess according to people who are working on the game. And well, all we have since the announcement at E3 is a very short teaser trailer and some pretty cool looking screenshots. Apparently the script was done on October 4th, looking at a tweet from Steven, a scriptwriter on the game. Well, maybe they are revisiting it now because they got more time. During the call, Ubisoft mentioned that going forward they want to get more feedback from players earlier in the development before having a lot of people work on the game. And also, and this is very interesting, according to Jason, there's like a big shakeup happening inside Ubisoft, where developers now have to pitch their game and say what is unique about it, because they think that that is one of the main reasons why Ghost Recon failed. That it did not have its own identity, but instead borrowed a lot of systems that it did not really need, like the RPG elements that we also find in Odyssey and The Division 2. I even made a video on this recently before this whole thing went down, that we should kind of be afraid about the future of Ubisoft games because everything is turning into the same thing. I'm still really curious how Far Cry 6 will be, because if New Dawn is any indication, then damage numbers and bullet punchy enemies are something we should totally expect. That was kind of my worry and critique, that everything is becoming an open world RPG in their portfolio, but seems like they are already tackling that head on internally, if Jason is to be believed. Should be a good thing to make sure that every game has a unique aspect. I'm curious to see how this will turn out in the coming years. We already know some things about what Ubisoft is planning to release between 2021 and 2022, but let's quickly go over Ghost Recon first and why, according to Ubisoft, it failed. Other reasons they gave was that there was just not enough time between Wildlands and this release, and that the innovations, quote unquote, that the game had were not very well implanted. And I think that this is in regards to the survival elements that they actually want to sort of improve in the post-launch of the game. I would argue though that people were ready for Breakpoint and actually very excited after the reveal in May, myself included, and you can actually easily see when and where it kind of went wrong. You see the gameplay reveal of Breakpoint here, very gritty, no HUD, pretty cinematic, focused on the stealth gameplay. None of the RPG elements, there were no drones that required a ton of shots to take out. You did not see the big and empty open world, just a cool infiltration of a modern base. People were down for this. Again, I saw excitement on my channel, and after their own reveal stream, it all seemed like a big step up from Wildlands, so people were curious to see where this would go. But at E3, everything changed, because then we suddenly saw the levels above the enemies, that there were drones with a lot of health bars, and that you could pick up gear and that it would impact your gear score. And then the first very gritty and survival promise kind of went away. You see the gameplay here that IGN published ahead of E3, like they were one of the first to publish it. I think it was an IGN first too. This was kind of the turning point where people suddenly realized, hey, I don't really want that stuff in my game. Ubisoft said though that the game's quality appeared to be on track, based on E3, Gamescom and previews, and I think that that is because we then did not know that that was basically the whole game, like in terms of variety. It's fun to clear a camp or take out a behemoth tank for the first time, but when you discover, and we all did when the game came out, that there's really nothing else in this massive open world, then you kinda get bored. Well, it's hard to see that at a preview event. Breakpoint was lacking the sense of progression, that you would work towards something cool. If you play the first few hours of the game, then you actually saw everything that Breakpoint had to offer, and I think the people during the beta discovered that too. And yeah, then why would you get the final game? I hope that Watch Dogs doesn't fall in that trap too, that the early part of the game is actually the same as the later part of the game, but we will have to find out. On paper, of course, these titles should now be better, thanks to the extra dev time. The short term for Ubisoft doesn't look that good, although their stock did recover a lot already after the major fall. People are optimistic about the future, and in the long term it actually looks quite good, because they likely have more hits on their hands than before. If they decided to push Gods and Monsters and Watch Dogs when they were not 100% ready, then these games would maybe not sell as well too. Assassin's Creed Kingdom seems to be on track though, and I don't think they want to move that away from the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Scarlet launch. Far Cry 6 in early 2021, and you already got a pretty good year, comparable to 2017 and 2018 when you had Origins and Far Cry 5. I'm only worried that Watch Dogs Legion and Gods and Monsters, and in some regards Rainbow Six Quarantine, will cannibalize each other or get cannibalized by the new Call of Duty, for example, because their release dates will be very close. Will be interesting to follow, and then beyond that, so between April 2021 and March 2020, we got 3 to 4 big AAA releases. Skull and Bones will be one of those titles. This one was delayed out of fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 2020, and then 3 other games, and maybe it might be the time finally for Beyond Good and Evil 2. I think that makes sense to release it there. We know that the Division developers are working on an Avatar game based on the James Cameron movie, so maybe they want to capitalize on the returning sequel in 2020. So a release 1 year after that movie might be the right time. Maybe Ubisoft wants to try For Honor again and release a sequel also on the next gen hardware. I think that would totally make sense. Or maybe they finally bring back Splinter Cell, although I think it's a little too soon in 2021. Now I can totally see another Assassin's Creed release in 2021. We already speculated about this, right? I namely think that Mike Laidlaw, the BioWare veteran, is working on the next Assassin's Creed at Ubisoft Quebec, so that just like with Origins to Odyssey, they will release one back to back. It totally worked out for them, so maybe if they are ready, they will totally do that. I will link to that video in a second. Of course, subscribe for everything Assassin's Creed, Watch Dogs Legion if you haven't already. It's sad that we have to wait longer for Watch Dogs, but it will be for the best. I still can't wait for it. And of course, when we know more about it, I will let you know here on the channel. Like this video to support the channel, and I will speak to you next time. Goodbye.